Hello everybody, I'm Barry.
And I'm Andrea.
And this is the Artisan Woodshed. So today we really thought we'd take a moment to talk about all of the various things that you really should consider when you're ready to actually mix your resin for the first time, and really talk about why so many of them, talk about the importance of each one, and so that you're really prepared. So in the situation you have a few things happen along the way, you're already prepared for it and things like that. So Andrea's got some stuff on her side. I've got some stuff on my side. And let's start with my side because that's really kind of the core of what it is we're here to talk about. Now today as an example, we're going to talk about deep pour, but a lot of these components would still apply for tabletop, although that brings some new dimensions, and then we'll do another video later on regarding doing tabletop. But today we're focusing on deep pour. And all resins have a part A and a part B. The differences between a deep pour and a tabletop is deep pour is a 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 parts A, 1 part B. And getting those ratios perfectly right and mixed is really, really, really important. So you want to start with your resin. I've got another video out there where I talk about really what is the best resin / epoxy to buy. We get a lot of those questions asked of us, and so I encourage you to go look at that. I think you'll find the answers when you're trying to figure out what kind of resin you really should be considering for your project as far as brand goes. So now that we've got these happen to be Upstart epoxy, and we also use liquid glass here, and we've used some others and really have had great success with all of them. Now another thing that I think is important to talk about is really how do you kind of clean up along the way. What if you get some resin or epoxy on something you don't want it on, whether it's your hands or maybe a tool or something like that? We have found that isopropyl alcohol really is all you need to have to help clean it up. It's one of the few things that I've found that is effective, and it is quite effective.
The one thing that it doesn't take the resin out of is clothes, such as, see my lovely apron? If I was doing a large deep pour, I would have on old clothes that I didn't care about because the splash is bigger. But in a project this size, an apron like this will keep you going.
That's kind of a little shot at me because I have ruined so many. Now we live in Central Florida, so it's always hot. But I have ruined so many shorts, so many shirts that were in perfectly good condition, and shoes and everything. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten resin on me, mainly because I tried to rush through some things, and you shouldn't do that. You should do it more the way she does it, but she's absolutely right. It's really super, super wise to have an apron because ultimately, no matter how careful you are, you're gonna get some spillage. It's just natural. So anyway, isopropyl alcohol. Now, this happens to be 70%. Now, it's really recommended if you can get 90% or higher. And you should start with that if you can, because if you have the habit of using 90% or higher, there's some cool effects that we'll demonstrate later on down the road that you can get by actually spraying your project with that to really solve a few problems, as well as take some creative, artistic, kind of chances with it to be able to do some unique things. But for the most part, if 70 is all you can get at the time, then 70 is fine for cleanup. You just don't want to mix with that. Okay, and then of course next, have plenty of paper towels around. Super, super, super important.
Quality paper towels.
Yes, quality. You probably don't need to go as far as invest in shop towels and stuff like that, where they're the blue paper towels that are a lot thicker. This is just like a typical Bounty or something like that here in the States, but a quality paper towel because you don't want it shredding on you while you're trying to do some things. Next up, when it comes to your mold here, there's lots of different molds that you can use. And she's going to talk about this one in a second, but this is a silicone mold. No matter which mold you need or you're going to use, you're going to have to weigh that wood down. That wood, like anything else, floats. And because it floats, if you pour your resin in and you don't have something weighing or securing that wood to the bottom of that particular mold, it's going to float to the top, and all that resin's going to seep underneath of it, and you're going to waste a lot of resin. Now here in our shop here, in this particular table, you can see we have what's called T-tracks installed. And so that gives us a unique ability of being able to use something along the lines of these that can go in the T-tracks and be able to secure the board down. For the longest time we were using pretty much weights. I think Our sons got really mad at me because, they went for a while. Maybe they weren't working out that much, and I was getting going in this, and I was using all of their weights all the time to weigh the wood down in the molds because this is small for us. We actually do a lot of larger molds too, but you want to have these HPVE, okay, HPVE blocks, and you can buy like a sheet of this, example, on Amazon. I just bought a sheet. It just arrived, and I cut it down into these blocks. This will not, it will stick slightly to resin, but it's easy to get off. Just take a hammer and you tap it off. And you want to put this on top of the board before you put your weight, because if I were to just go on top of the board with just this, or any other type of surface, it's going to stick to it and it's going to glue it to it because resin's basically a glue at the end of the day. So you want to have these, in other words, to be able to put in between the board and the weight, whatever you're doing, whether you're clamping it down or whether you're weighting it down. Now, Andrew, why don't you talk about some of the things on your side of the table?
Okay, the first thing we have, of course, is the mold that we're going to use. And over here, we actually have a silicone mat that my husband didn't mention. And we have the epoxy on here because if you get it on the wood, yes, you can sand it off. But if you're using it on your kitchen counter or something like that, you certainly don't want to drop this. It'll become a big issue.
Now, on top of that, when we do tabletop, and I'm going to show you an example here of a second of my wife working on some tabletop where we've literally got an 8-foot by 8-foot work table over here behind the cameras where we'll do a bunch at one time. And with that, we always put down a plastic over top of the wood. And the plastic we get, I just buy it in a big roll. It's 3 millimeters thick. You need at least 3 millimeter thick so you keep the durability of it. And we find that we can reuse that over and over and over. Oftentimes you can just peel back the epoxy that's left on it, take that off and throw it away.
Right, but if you're doing this at home and you're thinking you're going to do 1 or 2 of these, maybe a couple for Christmas, that giant box of the heavy duty plastic can get pretty expensive. So you can use anything else that would prevent the epoxy from getting on your countertops or in the garage.
And as a matter of fact, what was I doing for a long time when I was first getting going with this? I was taking large trash bags out of our 30-gallon trash cans and taping those to the floor and working on top of those. We've come a long way since then. But anyway, that works because you're going to get some drippage. Now, oftentimes if you're working in a mold like this, if you're careful, you don't really need to worry about that. The reason that we're not doing something underneath this, probably more than anything else, is because we are using these T-track things, and that would get in the way of that. But it's just not needed if you're careful, because at the end of the day, if you do get it on wood or your work table or something like that, you could just sand that down, but you really want to avoid doing that. So I noticed you've got a few other things inside your mold, Andrew. Let's keep talking about that.
I do. The first thing that has really been a lifesaver for us is this mold release. It is inexpensive, and it really does help the wood and the epoxy pop right out instead of having to pry it out. You don't require a lot, but it is, if you're going to be doing several molds, it's something that I would recommend. Unlike my husband, I come prepared, so I did not get him a pair of gloves for today. I got myself 2 pair. And the reason that I do that is I find oftentimes you catch it on something, it tears, you get something sticky on it from the resin. You can pull it off easily and take another one off from the side, but if they're in a box, now you've got resin all over your box, you've got gloves sticking to you. So always have an extra pair. They're inexpensive. It'll save you in the long run.
Been there, done that too many times.
And then, of course, we have the wood, which we talked about earlier. And I want to talk about mixing for a minute. When we talk about mixing, there's a couple different ways to do that. And one is by hand with a stir stick, and the other is using your drill and I don't know, what do you call that?
We'll call it a whisk for mixing things. It's actually just typically one that you mix paint with. Andrew, grab that other one. Just reach out and just go grab the one that we've been using for a long time that's nice and ugly. And as you can see right there, it's in some pretty bad shape. But here the thing is, you don't really have to worry about this that much because all of this is on there and you can actually get all of this off there. Now, one of the things and we've kind of stopped using this because I've been teaching my wife how to do a lot of this. And so far, she has surpassed me in many ways. Well, one little trick that I probably forgot to teach you, dear, was or recommend to you. How dare I teach you anything? But anyway, oftentimes when I'm finished mixing, I'll take the drill and I'll take it over top of my trash can and make sure my liner is separated out, and I'll just twirl it with a drill. Obviously, put some pressure on it to really kind of wring all of that excess resin off there, so you don't get as much residue off. But this stuff hardens hard as a rock, so no problem whatsoever continuing to use something like that. And these can be purchased on Amazon. These we purchased on a fly today through Ace Hardware, because we wanted to start with some nice clean things for you.
Right. Now, there's some advantages and disadvantages of both. And today we're talking about deep pour, but if I was doing tabletop, I would never mix with the drill because it adds too much air to your mixture and it's too difficult to get out. I don't think it matters quite as much.
Not really for deep pour. I have found a lot of people spend a tremendous amount of time. We're involved in a few Facebook groups out there that really talk about resin work. And a lot of people really spend a lot of time focusing on how many bubbles that they've got on the top of a deep pour. Now, if you have a planer or if it's a larger thing, you're going to put it on a slab mill, I have found that it's simply just not, I don't really care. I don't really care how many bubbles because it's ultimately going to go through a planer anyway, and all that's going to be taken off. It's not that I completely ignore the bubbles when I do it. I'll take care of it probably the first 20 minutes or so, but after that, I don't really worry about it that much because, again, it's going to be planed off. Now, if you don't have a planer in your shop and you're really trying to do and sand all of this down, that's a lot of work. I hope you're ready for that. But if you're doing it then you do want to focus on bubbles. And if it's a small project like that, just mix it all by hand. Obviously, by hand is easier when you're doing smaller quantities. But if you're doing larger quantities, you really need to be able to use a drill. Like the last resin table that we poured, I think was 6 gallons of resin that was in there. And that required several mixes just to even get that going. So that's a lot of resin that you're going to be doing it. And so we do those in 5-gallon buckets when we do those. But the bottom line is, like my wife talked about, it's kind of like whipped butter and you're whisking it, right? You're adding a lot of air to that whipped, which is what makes it whipped. And that's ultimately what's happening within this. Now, you can do a vacuum chamber. We actually just got one that we haven't actually tried yet. And I'm curious to see that out. That will suck all of the air out of that resin. So it's just a non-issue. We really can come to play on tabletop, but that's another video for another day. All right, so let's talk about the drill for a second before you get to the cups. Why is it important to really, not just have a drill that you're prepared to throw away at any given time?
Well, resin is a glue. And if I am not accurate and the resin gets up inside of here, this is done.
Yeah, well, the whole drill and everything's done. If you can see, this is a primarily one. I have a lot of Milwaukee tools here. Most of my tools here in the shop are Milwaukee. And you can see this thing has been, it's been through a lot. It's been a trooper. It's been great. But I only use that drill for mixing resin. And it's really important. You always want to make sure you're on your lowest setting of the drill. Most drills have a 1 and 2 setting, or maybe potentially more. Most have 1 and 2 for cordless drills. But you want to have that. And another thing that's really important, because we've been there, done that, make sure that before you start mixing, if you are going to use a drill, make sure that you've got a backup battery that is close, that you don't have to get up and move away from, or you're going to drip resin all over the place, and now we're back to cleaning everything up all over again. So, been there, done that too many times. So I see we've got some various mixing containers. Before you talk about that, these are not the typical ones we use. I went out to Ace Hardware. This is all they had. So, but this is kind of what we typically use, and it's what I want to recommend. Let me put that out in front of the camera, Andrea. You can get these on Amazon. They're really cheap, much more inexpensive than these. And these are the ones that we use a lot because mainly, if you can see that, they really have the ounces in there quite well. I'm trying to hold that up to the other camera, showing the ounces really well, whereas these have some limitations associated with them. But they're nice and clean for today. So let's talk about these and some of the things that we want to look for in our measuring cups.
Well, the first thing is these are new, so there's obviously no epoxy buildup. But if you didn't clean carefully and there was epoxy buildup, you need to account for that. These smaller containers actually have the ounces, but you can see the 24 ounces is not enough to fill the void that we calculated in the previous video. So for today, we are going to actually use 2 buckets to pour into this one and mix. Normally, when we would do that, we would use this, which is the same size as this bucket. And so we wouldn't have to do that.
And you could do it up. For example, if you're doing, I'm going to make up a number. If you're doing a 2-to-1 ratio, if you're doing, you need a total of 30 ounces, so you're doing 20 ounces of part A and 10 ounces of part B, you could fill A up to 20 ounces and then go on up after that. Now, precision measuring is important. You really don't want to get it off. You need to get as close to it as you can. That's super important. So when you're measuring, make sure you're taking that into consideration kind of when you're doing that.
Absolutely. And because it is a 2-to-1 ratio, anything that you can divide by 3 is going to be a lifesaver. Tabletop would be 2. But you don't want to be doing calculations, oh, this is about a half, this is about a quarter.
Because I couldn't do that.
It doesn't work. So round up your number to where it's divisible by 3, and that'll make it a lot easier for us if we're looking at, what did we say, 27 ounces.
Right.
We could round up, we would need to round up, it was 27 is divisible by 3, it's 9, but we would probably round up to 30 for seepage.
Right.
I wouldn't do 29, it's too hard.
Kind of round up. And we talk about that, a lot right before some of this, or we'll talk about that here in a second, I should say. Andrew, if you could talk real quick about some of the safety items that we use and how you do that. And then I'm going to reach over behind us over here and pull out something that I forgot to bring over that's quite important when you're mixing, and that's the mica powder. So go ahead and start doing that.
So I have in my little bag that says Mom a respirator mask, so that way when we're working with products like mica powder or anything that smells, I can protect my lungs. I have a pair of headphones that I cover my ears with, and they protect it. And of course I have goggles. I like to wash everything that I have and put it away after each use in a Ziploc bag. It keeps it nice and clean and ready for the next time. Not all of us are like that.
And it says Mom on it, and when she first told me she was doing that, I was like, oh, come on, Andrea. It's a wood shop. Why are you worrying about it if it gets a little dust on it? And then every time I go to put my respirator on, I'm like, oh, my gosh, look at all this dust. She's so much smarter than me. So, obviously, you're going to want to add some color to it. Now, this, speaking of dust, I've got dust all over these. But this is a mica powder that we particularly use here. It's made by Eye Candy. I've had great results with that. There's lots of options out there for you to use. It happens to be a purple. Here we've got a brushed brown. And then over here, I believe we've got an iceberg blue. Now, these are ultimately hang on a second, I've got a love bug on me. We've got, these are the mica powders that we use. Now, also, there is also some liquid pigment that you can use. And ultimately, this is highly concentrated. So it depends on the look you're going for. If you really want to get a solid color, in other words, no pattern, no swirl, or anything like that, if you look back behind us in this example here, this is a piece that is in works. It still needs to be put on the slab bill. And it's actually got about 3/4 of an inch of mica powder, and then everything else is clear above it to really kind of show really the 3D dimension of all of that. So if you're looking for that type of effect, you want to use mica powder. But if you see back up over there, you see the black one up above over there. That's a solid black. And I'll try and bring in a shot of that while I'm talking here. But that's where you really want to use a liquid pigment for that. And that's where you get that. So that's anywhere from a solid color to a translucent color. But ultimately, it's kind of solid. So that's where a liquid pigment comes along. And then there's lots of variants out there. I'd love to tell you that they're all just as good as the next. But some you may want to do your homework on and see what kind of the history is on that to see how well they hold up. But these are some of the fundamental things that you really need to have at your hands, within a hand's reach when you're being able to do these things.
Absolutely. And for me, the best part of these projects is the creativity that you can use. And I foresee many videos on different ways to blend and use the mica powder or the pigments together with varying colors and translucencies and different things in them because they can create really, truly unique pieces that will be enjoyed for a lifetime.
Right, and that's one of the things about this channel. We're really going to film a lot of things that what we're working on at any given time, and you can kind of see how all that unfolds and what that turns out to be, and we're constantly learning from this, and we're constantly evolving and getting more creative ideas, and the more we do it, the more creative we get with it. And so there's so many options out there. And yes, if you want to have a multi-dimensional color aspect to it, you can even do layered colors. There's so many things that you can do. But for the purpose of today, we're going to do a very basic pour. We're going to do a basic solid color epoxy pour. We'll probably do the blue or purple. We kind of like both of those. They tend to go well, especially with darker woods. So anyway, we're going to kind of get everything out of the way here and get everything ready to actually mix, demonstrate that for you, and then pour, and then we'll kind of continue the conversation after that. Sound good, Andrea?
Sounds good.
All right, let's get to work.